Hi, and welcome to That's Ready Mysterious. Join me for an intriguing look into real-life mysteries. Who was the mad gasser of Mattoon? What was whaling at the Wilga waterhole? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts and references for all episodes can be found at that'sreadymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about the Great Maple Syrup Heist. Simon Trepanier, one-time director of the Quebec Maple Syrup Producers, or QMSP, said, "To steal that amount of maple syrup means you have to know the market. We are talking about big players." The people of Quebec, Canada have been producing maple syrup since before the Indigenous peoples of the Eastern Woodlands taught European settlers how to do it. Despite this, syrup production is usually secondary farming for the Quebecois due to the price of syrup being dependent solely upon the quality, quantity, and timing of the harvest. It's simply not a stable enough market for people to be able to rely solely on it economically. For most producers, it's either a hobby, a second career, or a source of retirement income, but it is still important income. Philippe Turcotte, for example, is a producer from Drummondville, Quebec. He produced about 35,000 pounds of syrup a year, which was worth about $100,000 in 2013. He also worked for the telecommunications company Bell Canada full-time. Turcotte said of the QMSP, "They took this industry out of the backwoods. For myself, business has never flourished so much." Quebec produces about 70% of the world's maple syrup. In 2020, Quebec produced 96.4% of all Canadian maple products. Canada as a whole produces about 75% of the world's maple syrup. Maple sap is about 3% sugar. After harvesting the sap, producers use reverse osmosis to get the sugar content to 14%. Then it's boiled in an evaporator to a concentration of exactly 66% sugar to make maple syrup. In 2012, syrup production was estimated to be about 96.1 million pounds, with a wholesale value of about 270 million Canadian dollars, or around 268 million US. About 2/3 of bulk exports of maple syrup was sent to the United States. The rest was sent to Japan, Germany, France, the UK, and other countries. In 1966, Quebec started the Quebec Maple Syrup Producers to manage the supply of Quebec maple syrup. The QMSP set quotas for maple syrup producers. The farmers can produce more than the quota but will not be paid for any excess until the reserves have been exhausted, and they must pay storage fees. The QMSP also oversees production and sale of maple products out of Quebec. Many members of the QMSP are grandfathered in because they are descendants of the original founders. However, for potential future members, it can take years before they're adopted into the program. In 2013, there were 1,200 producers on the waitlist. Because of the QMSP, not all maple growers can sell maple products. The QMSP has undercover agents that go to roadside stands and check on people who have high electric bills to make sure they are not producing and selling maple syrup. The creation of the QMSP started what was referred to as the Maple Wars, which were lawsuits and other attempts to stop the QMSP from controlling the supply. Some people say that the creation of the QMSP led to the creation of an underground market for maple syrup. Some were against what they saw as communist program to regulate the supply. According to Brendan Burrell, writer of the 2013 article in Bloomberg titled "Sticky Gold," this frustration led a group of rebels that were opposed to the controls on the maple syrup market in Canada to orchestrate the heist. He explained that people have this resource in their backyards and could be producing and selling every year, but the QMSP didn't allow it. In the year 2000, the QMSP created a strategic reserve for the province to stabilize the market, because by that time there was more production than demand and prices had fallen from $2.20 per pound in 1998 to $1.56 per pound in 2000. In 2002 and 2003, the Federation created a central sales agency and quota system for production. The quota was based on the producer's best 2 years' production. The quota system increased prices from an average of $2.06 per pound in 2002 to $2.82 per pound in 2013. The province's producers pay 12 cents per pound sold to the QMSP. A gallon of maple syrup weighs about 11 pounds. Not everyone liked the Federation, however. Etienne St. Pierre, a widower, started exporting his own syrup from New Brunswick. St. Pierre said that the Federation can't do anything once you cross the border of Quebec. However, on April 17, 2006, the QMSP sent out an investigator who asked to buy 4 barrels of syrup, and St. Pierre agreed. St. Pierre was not the only producer to ignore quotas. Some other producers sold all of their syrup through St. Pierre. He was ordered to pay $264,166 Canadian dollars, or $230,091.73 US dollars in damages. St. Pierre refused to pay, and he and his second-in-command taunted the Federation. In 2011, there was a surplus of maple syrup, so the QMSP created an extra facility in which to store it in the small town of Saint-Louis-de-Blanfort. Saint-Louis-de-Blanfort is a small town about 2 hours north of Montreal, located on the side of the Trans-Canadian Highway. Although the syrup held in the Saint-Louis-de-Blanfort Strategic Reserve was worth about 30 million Canadian dollars, or a little over 29.9 million US dollars, by 2012 the facility had poor security. There were no cameras, so no video evidence and no alarms. There was only one guard on duty who stopped by the facility once a day. On July 30, 2012, Michel Gavreau arrived at the facility to do an inventory check. The QMSP had hired his company, Vera Grimard, to audit the inventory. Each barrel weighed about 271 kilograms, or around 620 pounds when full. The barrels were blue and stacked 6 high and in rows that were hundreds deep. There were about 16,000 barrels, or roughly 1/10 of Quebec's annual production, stored at the warehouse. Each barrel was full of grade A maple syrup, which was trading at about 32 Canadian dollars, or $31.87 US, a gallon. That works out to around 1,800 Canadian, or around $1,792.53 US, per barrel. That was about 13 times the price of crude oil at the time. When Gavreau climbed on top of the barrels, one fell over. It should have been heavy enough to support his weight, but this barrel was empty. The QMSP then did a deeper inspection, which took about 2 months. In that time, they discovered thousands of barrels were either empty or had had the syrup replaced with water. Some of the barrels were rusty, which indicated the maple syrup within had been removed because maple syrup does not oxidize. About 60%, 6 million pounds, or close to 545,454.5 gallons of syrup was missing. The missing syrup was worth about 18.7 million Canadian dollars. It would have taken more than 100 tractor trailers to take all of that syrup away. Between 2011 and 2012, over the course of several months, thieves siphoned syrup out of the barrels located in the Saint-Louis-de-Blanfort Reserve. They siphoned about 2,700 metric tons, or almost 2,980 US tons, out of almost 10,000 barrels. The syrup they stole was worth around 18.7 million Canadian dollars, or 18.6 million US dollars. Some of this syrup would be recovered, but thousands of barrels worth were not. After discovering the syrup was missing, the QMSP contacted Quebec's provincial police force, the Sûreté du Québec, or SQ, to look into the theft. The SQ quickly realized the theft was an inside job. The thieves had rented part of the warehouse so that they could come and go without anyone noticing. The thieves included a team of truck drivers, syrup dealers, and sugar shack workers, all who worked together to steal the syrup. People who had access to the barrels moved them to other storage places where the syrup could be siphoned out without anyone noticing. Then the syrup was sold to innocent buyers in Ontario, New Brunswick, and the United States. After being sold, the syrup could not be traced. Most of the syrup was eaten or blended into legal syrup before anyone even noticed it was missing. In total, about 25% of the stolen syrup was recovered. During the investigation, the police spoke to more than 300 people. 40 search warrants were issued. 26 suspects were arrested. The police quickly determined the ringleader was a man named Richard Valliere. In syrup circles, he was known as a barrel roller, or someone who found ways around the QMSP regulations. He was supposedly involved in the syrup black market for years. Valliere had a motive. In 2007, he was fined 1.8 million Canadian dollars, or 1.5 million US dollars, by the QMSP for selling syrup illegally. In 2014, Valliere admitted he had been involved in the black market for 10 years prior to the heist and had previously been sought by the QMSP for it. Valliere said that a man named Avik Karan, whose spouse co-owned the warehouse, told him about the barrels. He also said that Karan suggested stealing the syrup. After the heist, the police went to Etienne St. Pierre's farm with a Quebec warrant, which was no good in New Brunswick. They later returned with a New Brunswick warrant. When they searched his farm, St. Pierre had more than $1 million Canadian, or $871,012 US, worth of syrup. He said that about 700 to 800 of the barrels that he had came from Valliere. Karan was sentenced to 5 years in prison and fined 1.2 million Canadian dollars, or $1 million US dollars, for his part in the heist. Valliere was found guilty of fraud, trafficking, and theft and was sentenced in April of 2017 to 8 years in prison and fined 9.1 million Canadian dollars, or about 7.7 million US dollars. Valliere has up to 10 years to pay the fine. If he doesn't pay it in time, he will be sentenced to more time in prison. 3 other men were convicted for being a part of the theft ring, but they all received shorter sentences. There were more than 12 people involved in the heist, and most of them have gotten away with it. After the heist, the QMSP increased security in their warehouses. Despite the heist, they still exist, but they use better security at their warehouses and use better warehouses now. Of the 2,700 metric tons, or nearly 3,000 US tons, stolen, only about 450 metric tons, or almost 500 US tons, was recovered. Some of the recovered syrup was considered unsafe for human consumption and was destroyed. In January of 2018, the Netflix series Dirty Money included a story on the heist. Amazon Prime released a series called The Sticky, which is a dark comedy, in 2023. The Sticky is loosely based on the crime. Who are the thieves that weren't caught for their part in the Great Maple Syrup heist? How did they get away with it? What do you think? Leave a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ready Mysterious. Join me next week for another captivating mystery.